Hi, I'm Trent Stellingwerff. I'm the Director of Performance Solutions at the Canadian Sport Institute Pacific, as well as the Sports Science, Sports Medicine Lead for Athletics Canada. And you're listening to the Physical Performance Show.
Failure is not an option.
I've had my ups and my downs.
I think it's an absolutely breakthrough experience.
Welcome to the Physical Performance Show, the show designed to inspire the pursuit of your physical best performance. I'm your host, Brad Beer. Listen in as we delve into how the world's top physical performers achieve their success, as well as the highs, the lows, and the journey of getting there. Let's get ready, set, let's go. Welcome back to the Physical Performance Show, brought to you by Physiocram and Pogo Physio. I'm Brad Beer, sports and exercise physiotherapist by trade and training, and founder of Pogo Physio. Each week, we'll aim to bring you the latest and greatest information, the highs, the lows, and the learnings, all with the intention of helping you perform at your own physical best. We do this across a range of episodes, including featured performers, interest editions, coaches' corners, and expert editions. And today, get ready to learn and enjoy from one of the world's most regarded and greatest minds on all things fueling for the endurance athlete. I'll bring you a conversation that I had recently with Trent Stellingwerff, PhD, Director of Performance Solutions for the Canadian Sport Institute Pacific. By way of bio, Dr. Trent Stellingwerff is an experienced researcher, having published more than 40 peer-reviewed scientific publications. Trent is currently on the editorial board for the International Journal of Sports Physiology and Performance, and also the International Journal of Sports Nutrition and Exercise Metabolism. Trent has co-authored 6 book chapters focusing on the role that nutrition can play in supporting elite athlete performance, including a chapter on nutrition for the endurance athlete for the newest version of the IOC Sports Nutrition Encyclopedia. Trent has attended numerous World Championships and Olympic Games as part of Team Canada's integrated support team, and Trent consults with numerous Olympic athletes from around the world, including his very own wife, Hillary, who competed for Canada in the 1500 metres at the 2012 and 2016 Olympic Games. And furthermore, in 2006, Trent took on a position in Switzerland for the Nestlé Research Centre, heading up PowerBar as the Senior Research Scientist in Sport Nutrition, Energy and Performance. And get ready with a pen and paper as Trent shares around fueling for the endurance athlete, current best practices, the differences required for the fueling of the elite versus recreational runner and athlete, ketogenic versus carbohydrate-based fueling, intake strategies for optimizing endurance performance whilst racing and training, the concept of body composition, periodization, and the all-important topic of energy availability for the athlete, and the consequences on both the health of the athlete and also the performance of the athlete when energy availability is deficient. We discuss the emergent awareness of the condition known as REDS, Relative Energy Deficiency in Sports. It's pertinent information for every listener who is out there trying to pursue their own best with their physical performance. Trent shares around how as little as 300 calories a day in energy deficiency as an athlete can really have quite disastrous effects. And conversely, how getting energy balance right as an athlete can really set an athlete up for success. So get ready with a pen and paper. Here is my conversation with Trent Stellingwerff, PhD, on all things fueling for the endurance athlete. Trent Stellingwerff, this has been something I've been looking forward to recording for some time. Welcome to the Physical Performance Show.
Thanks for having me. Great introduction. I'm humbled.
You know, as per the bio, the introduction, you have done so much. But to paint a picture on a typical day or week in the life of Trent Stellingwerff at the moment with the various hats that you wear. Can you put us in a picture of your current life and then go back and bring us through your professional career to date?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a performance director at the Canadian Sport Institute Pacific, and that's here in Victoria, beautiful Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. And so I help lead our physiology and nutrition groups here. And our institute works across 20-plus winter and summer Olympic and Paralympic sports. Me, primarily, I'm deployed through Athletics Canada to provide physiology as well as being their sports science and sports medicine director. And a lot of my background in research, my former competitive history is as a middle distance runner. So most of my research is based in endurance sport, and I'm adjunct at the local universities, University of Victoria, University of British Columbia. So we have a few students that I help supervise doing research projects in various sports as well.
And to add to that, you've got two boys under 5 years of age, and your wife Hillary, who has had two Olympic outings as a 1,500 metre runner at, I believe, 2012 and what were the other games, Trent?
2012 and 2016, and then we had our first child between that. So at some point when we can come up for air, I have an incredible case study to publish on her return back to elite performance post-pregnancy. We basically measured everything from blood work to biomechanics to physiology, obviously performance metrics, but just need time to write that one up.
And I mean, which we'll touch on today, hopefully, but there's already that 8-9 year case study of your wife, Hillary, that is such a great read, which would be great to touch on today around her periodization of her body composition.
Whatever you want to chat on, we can cover later today, yeah.
And Trent, your background, you were formerly with Power Bar for a while there in Europe, I believe?
Yeah, so I guess, if we go way back, I did my undergraduate degree at Cornell University where I ran track, and that's in Ithaca, New York, and I majored in nutrition there, minored in exercise science. I then went on and did a PhD at the University of Guelph in Canada, and Guelph is especially strong in nutritional sciences. So again, all my graduate work was all mainly in nutrition-based physiology with humans and time trials and biopsies and blood draws. At that time, I was a assistant coach with the University of Guelph in Speed River, which is a pretty strong track club here in Canada, and they put 6 or 7 athletes on the Rio Olympic team in endurance alone, for example. And then from there, Hillary and I got married. I did a postdoc in Maastricht, Netherlands. So we moved to the Netherlands with Luc van Loon's lab, where I learned just an absolute enormous amount around protein metabolism. And then I got the job with Nestle. And at the time, Nestle owned Power Bar, and that was based out of Lausanne, Switzerland. So Hillary and I lived there for almost 6 years. And I helped lead the research and development for Power Bar in-house as well as with collaborations globally. And so those collaborations included Louise Burke in Australia, for example, for your Australian listeners, but with people all over the world. And then I got recruited back to Canada here at our Olympic Institute. So that's kind of a quick and dirty journey. Yeah.
And one theme there tends to be you can only live where it's beautiful.
That is part of the decision matrix, absolutely, for sure. I would forego beauty in the short term when I have grad students contact me about, where do I go, what do I do? And if Mike Joyner from the Mayo Institute in Minnesota is ever listening, we're good friends. I had a student once contact me, and Mike's like, I got a spot for you. And the student was like, well, it's Minnesota. It's really cold there. I'm like, it's freaking Mike Joyner's lab. It's 4 years of your life. Go. And but I think when you finally settle and if you get the opportunity to live in beautiful places, I love the outdoors. I run, I mountain bike. We're outdoorsy, so we try to maximize that as well.
Oh, fantastic. Practicing what you preach. Let's start the conversation here. I saw a tweet that just went up and there was a bit of commentary from yourself on your Twitter account, which is a must follow for anyone listening in. But it was about proven nutrition strategies. There was a tweet that went out about a journalistic piece around vegan.
Oh, the one from today.
Yeah.
Oh, you're doing your homework. Okay, just today.
Right vegan diets and. if as listeners of the show, as athletes, recreationally competitive, recreational, elite, sub-elite, there is a myriad of opinions. There's never been more. If we talk about maybe the endurance side of things here, Trent, as a priority, what are the proven strategies? And obviously then you can layer it with varying levels of performance. But, we hear about ketogenic, we hear about low carb, we hear about vegan. Can you speak to some of the myths and then also outline the proven evidence-based approaches?
Yeah, so I think if I start macro and go micro on this question, there is no question. The more research and the more I read, the more I just realize how bloody complex humans are and how unbelievably complex, impressively complex natural food is. The thousands of phytochemicals and micronutrients and substrates in an apple alone is mind-boggling. And so historically and to this day, nutritional epidemiology of gross nutritional intakes, usually based by very poorly done questionnaires and doing shoddy statistical work to show correlations, has done a massive disservice to nutrition, full stop, because when you have that level of complexity in humans and that level of diversity in foods, it's really easy to correlate everything with everything at certain points, and it gets really messy. So I think it's just really good to appreciate that. I'll also say, as we move a little closer, a little more micro, over my career, I've seen a lot of ways to be successful as an athlete, both in nutrition as well as different types of training principles and training approaches. I'm mainly an exercise physiologist who does a lot of nutrition research. I'm not a registered dietitian, but I work across so many successful coaches, all of which have various approaches. So that's important to recognize as well. I will say in certain contexts, every single diet works. However, the more extreme the diet is, the less contexts and situations it will work in. And so can keto work? Yeah, I actually think, and I penned an article on metabolism, on nutrition for ultra running, that if the exercise intensity is so low and someone has a lot of GI problems with carbohydrate foods and they're running at lower than about 50% of VO2 max, so fat oxidation is really high and the event's longer than 12 or 14 hours, then keto's an option. It's the context of the situation that needs to be fully appreciated, the context of the physical determinants of performance that need to be fully appreciated. And it is impossible to capture that on Twitter. And it's impossible, given the complexity of human metabolism, for the vast majority, and no disrespect meant, for journalists to be able to capture that right in articles. There are a handful of journalists who do a great job at capturing that complexity. Alex Hutchison is one of them, for example, does a pretty good job of doing his homework on the complexities of the science. So I'll say that extreme diets that generally don't work in most Olympic sports are keto diets. Olympic sports tend to be almost exclusively carbohydrate driven. Carbohydrate metabolism is more efficient per liter of oxygen consumed. Does that efficiency matter in a 14-hour race? Probably not as much. So anything really extreme, I think we just need to be careful about. I'm always nervous, and I dislike recommendations to just get rid of entire macronutrients, like whether it's vegan or whether it's a carbohydrate. It tends to be a recipe for obsessive compulsiveness, or the term in terms of eating disorder diagnosis is orthorexia nervosa, which is an over-obsession with clean eating. My definition is, if you can't eat what grandma bakes you on Christmas because it's not clean enough, you got a problem. And you got to enjoy grandma's apple pie on Christmas morning or Christmas afternoon. There's a time and a place to be really strict with your diet, and there's a time and a place where it's okay. So I haven't gone through every single type of diet, but I hope I've given a framework where people can say, okay, that's really extreme. I should approach with caution, do my homework, before I make a decision and jump on a bandwagon or not.
I think that's a great place to start, Trent, in terms of laying out that framework. And the key message I took there is, if it's extreme, proceed with caution. There's many ways to fuel an athlete. The hard part is, there's still going to be performance at the end of the day through a diet A, B, or C. Unless it's a controlled study, then you never know the effect it really had, I guess, in many ways, do you? Like, you don't know what was possible if it was an altered.
You don't. Like, I think we have better statistical tools now with some of the epidemiological approaches or observational studies to maybe get a bit closer to saying it's X, Y, or Z, but it really is challenging. I mean, there's evidence that in Usain Bolt's best years in 2008, 2009, he was fueled on chicken nuggets. And I was at those Olympic Games, and I saw a lot of chicken nuggets across the floor. Is that okay over one or two races as a world-class sprinter? It's probably not going to hurt him so much. If he did that year-round, it's a problem. And I think I've said this on another podcast, is part of the issue with nutrition is we all eat, so we all are experienced. And just because you're experienced on something doesn't make you an expert. We all eat 4, 5, 6 times a day. It's part of our culture. It's part of our history. If you go to Europe, countries' entire cultures are based on food. I ride an airplane a lot. I'm very experienced in an airplane. You don't want me up front driving the airplane. I'm not an expert pilot. So you don't see these Twitter debates on open heart surgery because there's just a very specialized field who appreciate the nuance of the complexity of a heart. And in nutrition, it's just everyone's got an opinion, right? So just beware.
Well, this is rare air that we are hearing from you, who is an expert in the field. So, Trent, you mentioned carbohydrate metabolism or oxidation, fueling an endurance runner, for example. So if we talk about marathoning, I'm a physiotherapist, yet sports physio here in Australia, yet a lot of the times I'm fielding questions about fueling for a marathon. And it's a cop-out answer, but my answer is it depends. It depends on the intensity you want to run it at. It depends on your training history. There's so many factors. But Trent, I heard you speaking on a podcast with, I think it was Dr. Bubbs, around fueling for marathons, and I thought it was really interesting and practical advice. You were speaking about, depending on if you're going to be a 2-hour, 1-minute runner, or whether you're going to be a 4-hour marathoner, your needs vary. So can you just practically speak to, the levels of a marathon in there and the fueling behind those?
Yeah, there's actually very little data of elite marathoners on a treadmill with a mouthpiece on a metabolic cart. In terms of measuring the oxidation of fats and carbohydrates that they actually use at marathon pace while fed and fueling. We can make some extrapolations, and I'm a co-author in some papers where we've obviously measured that submaximally, although we're trying to answer another question. But long story short is most of those elite athletes are so impressively fast that they're running probably pretty close to almost 100% carbohydrate oxidation when they're fed with breakfast, and they're fueling 60, 70 grams of carbohydrate per hour. That makes a lot of sense. Since 1918, the Nobel Prize winner August Crowe has shown for every liter of oxygen consumed, if you oxidize 100% carbohydrate, it's about 5.5% more efficient in terms of the ATP produced than if you oxidize 100% fat. And although 5.5% of efficiency, so efficiency means you can run faster at the same VO2 demand, that can make a pretty big difference over a marathon. And the great Ron Mon a few years ago, one of the best applied nutrition scientists on the planet at an ACSM, back calculated what that might be. And for an elite marathoner, a very small shift in oxidation could be 1 to 2 minutes in their marathon time. So yes, it does make a difference at that level. Now, it's also important to recognize and appreciate that your 4-hour marathoners are not at 85 to 90% of VO2 max and not at close to 100% carbohydrate oxidation. They're more at 50 to 60 or maybe 55 to 65% VO2 max. And if we, again, dig in the literature, Asker Ukendrup is on several papers showing the maximal fat oxidation in terms of grams per minute happens at around 60 to 65% of exercise intensity. And a lot of marathoners who are at 4 hours, 5 hours are going to be around those types of intensities. They're not at the 90% or 85% that elites are at. So there's a significant contribution of fat oxidation that occurs in the sub-elite athletes. They still, if you do the theoretical calculations, will still run out of glycogen. There's only about 2,000 calories of stored glycogen in your muscles. If you look at metabolic cost of running, it just doesn't add up. And it in most athletes will run out around 30 to 35 kilometers, and that's the unique and alluring beauty of the marathon at 42K. If it was 30K, everyone and their dog would do it, right? So it's pretty cool that way. A very rough back of the envelope running caloric expenditure equation that all of us can do is when you're running, it's about 1 calorie per kg body weight per kilometer moved. In fact, tracer studies and heart rate data, you'll all get almost to the same ballpark as that one calorie per kg body weight per kilometer moved. So if you're 100 kgs, it's 100 calories per kilometer. And if you're an elite male at 60 kgs, it's only 60 calories per kilometer moved. And they're moving in kilometers a lot quicker than the 100 kg marathoners. So that puts you a little bit into the caloric demand required for the race. And yeah, so, fueling is exponentially more important when you're elite. It becomes a little less important because there's a higher fat oxidation demand for athletes. They're at lower, or for slower athletes. Their caloric requirements are lower because there's a higher fat oxidation rate. They still probably have to fuel a little bit. And I think a consequence sometimes of a lot of the N=1 Twitter accounts of keto diets, which work, which that's a whole other discussion that I'm not as briefed on, as the evidence around weight loss is a heck of a lot stronger than for performance. Well, if a 80 or 90 kilogram overweight marathoner goes on a keto diet and loses 10 kilograms and run faster, well, was it the keto diet or the weight loss? And that's something not always brought forth or considered. So anyways, that's a little bit of heavy metabolism, but hopefully it helps explain what that might be.
Trent, thank you. And I mean, these are broad questions, and they're therefore not easy to answer. So thank you for trying to distill that. You mentioned there fuel a little bit for the sub-elite recreational, say 4-hour marathoner. So I'm reading there that you still need a gel. You still need to fuel through the race. Yeah, no, I think for the vast majority of folks, absolutely. With our elites, we're trying to titrate out and maximize fueling. With a lot of elite runners, because of the bouncing nature and dynamic nature of the event, a lot of them will come in at around somewhere between 40 and 70 grams of carbs per hour. In Ironman triathlon on the bike, I've seen values at 90 or 100 grams of carbohydrate per hour, mainly because on the bike you don't have a ballistic action going on your GI tract, and the Ironman distances, the intensity is a lot lower, so you tend to have less gastrointestinal issues. For a lot of your 4-hour marathoners, they might do just fine on 1 gel an hour, which is about 25 grams of carbs an hour, and enough fluids to get through the race, and that may work quite effectively for them. And if you contrast that to who I know you've spoken about, but Eliud Kipchoge in Berlin, setting the world marathon record so amazingly. His fuel, and you're close to the sources there with people in your circle. What would have Eliud been fueling, that 2-hour 1-minute marathon? I'm a step removed from that inner circle, but certainly good friends and colleagues with Andy Jones, who is in the inner circle and was involved with the Nike Breaking 2 attempt. And I will say a few things. I know he uses Morton, which is a new a new carbohydrate-based drink on the market, which uses this
encapsulation process, which supposedly is able to deliver out of your stomach through gastric emptying increased carbohydrate, so even deliver even more at lower potential GI side effects. The hard evidence for that is still out. There's no published paper, but I know a few research groups that are indeed working on that. So kudos to Morton for paying to do research. So I know he uses that drink, and I do know that this year at the Berlin Marathon, instead of having aid stations every 5K, they did them every 2.5K. So they went from 8 to 16 aid stations for Kipchoge. And when I was watching the race, looking at how long he was with his bottles and everything else, and just, various hearsay, I've heard he's trying to push in 90 to 100 grams of carbs per hour, and that is on the very high end of what I've seen achievable for a runner. I've seen a lot of that in cyclists where the intensity is lower, but if that is indeed the case, that's pretty impressive. And again, anecdotal elite evidence that I don't know a single elite who doesn't try to maximize carbohydrate fueling for performance, full stop. So,
and that includes, the carb loading, if you like, leading into the event, and then obviously trying to maximize it during the event.
Yeah. So, carb loading helps with pushing, about 200 to another 300 calories of glycogen into your skeletal muscles, as well as making sure your liver glycogen, think of your liver as a second sports drink bottle. It's just in your body, at maxing that out. And so, that extra bit can give you, as I said, 1 kcal per kg per kilometer. You can do the math. It can give you, another 3 or 4 kilometers of wiggle room in there. And so, the thing to realize, though, and there's an old classic study on a hilly cross-country skiing course, is when you load glycogen, for every gram of glycogen, you also load in about 2.5 to 3 grams of water. And so when you glycogen load, a lot of athletes will increase body weight by about 1 to 2%. A lot of that happens naturally if you're on a higher carbohydrate diet and you just taper and you're not exercising as much. That extra body weight on a 10K hilly road race is probably worse. It's ergolytic, because you're having in just 10K, you're probably not muscle glycogen limited, and now you've just added water weight to the start line. And so, I'll talk openly and frankly with the athletes that I work with on this and say, hey, we need to practice carbohydrate loading a few times. I want you to do serial body weights. I want you to know what it's going to feel like to be maybe a little heavier, feel a little bloated on the start line of a really hard, long workout, but also realize that as you go through the race, you're going to burn off that water. You'll actually increase total body water as well as total glycogen. And just because you feel a little sluggish in the first 10K, that's okay. You're going to feel $1 million better at 35K than, and can offset that sluggish first 10K where you maybe feel a little bloated or a little heavy. So, carbohydrate loading, again, has a contextual situation where it makes sense, and perhaps in other situations where it doesn't make sense. A classic example is, at the Olympics, sometimes the road race is 2 or 3 days after the road race is the time trial, which is a lot shorter. Sometimes it's only 40 minutes for women. Well, if it's a hilly time trial course and you're tapered, and perhaps you could over glycogen load and show up at the start line 3% heavier body weight, and not do as well on your time trial because you've just overdone a nutrition intervention. So these are things that you need to think about when you're applying them in the elite environment. And
there's that word again, Trent, context. Contextual applications here. Trent, ingesting carbohydrate during a marathon, so still on a longer day on the feet. For a listener, are there any tips or tricks on how to best ingest it? I've heard things about taking longer to get it in, getting it down the trap, put it in your mouth, squishing it around. What are the best practices there, Trent?
So very practically, it depends if you have an elite bottle status or if you're Joe Blow public. So every marathon I've ever done, I'm Joe Blow public. So you need to first practice and prepare for whether or not you get elite bottle status, which means you can grab bottles and gels off a table usually every 5K, and you then practice your fueling that way. And in that context, just to finish off that narrative, generally speaking, you only need about 250 to 300 mLs per bottle, because it's pretty hard to fuel much more than about 150 to 200 at each aid station. You want a little bit extra. If you overfill your bottles, you're just carrying extra weight. You want a little bit extra, but you don't need a full liter in there. Practice with carrying the bottle for a while. We found over time that people tend to consume more when they just take the time with the bottle, and it tends to result in a little less of a bloated feeling and perhaps a little less air sucked in and other things. You can practice fueling, and it does get easier when you practice, even for the elite athletes who are running well under 5-minute miles and around 3 minutes per kilometer pace. You do need to practice pulling it off the aid table too, because at those paces for the elites, the tables come pretty fast. For non-elites, it's a whole other ball game, and you really need to do your homework on the race website of finding out where the aid tables are, what is at each of the aid tables. Some of them are water only, some of them are water and sports drink, all in cups, and some of them will feature gels. Things like gels are pretty easy to carry on you, and so you should practice carrying gels. For example, if you haven't practiced before and you're a woman or a guy that slips a gel into the waistband of your shorts or in your sports bra, I've seen horror stories where it's rubbed the wrong way and you're bleeding halfway through the race. So again, just practice ahead of time with how you're going to carry those, what they're going to look like. Time your gels around water stations, because if you take a gel and it's all gummy and sticky in your mouth, there's nothing worse. Like you do need water with the gel. So it's, again, practicing that. With the cups, ideally the aid stations half fill all the cups. There's nothing worse than going to an aid station, grabbing a full cup, because half of it's going to spill out all over you anyways. When you grab the cup it almost completely closed, so pinch it. And then as you run, it's pinched. Less of it spills out, and you can actually kind of siphon it into your mouth. Again, practice with these paper cups so that you get really good at doing that. It might require a slight slowdown in pace with the paper cups, but if you're able to fuel and get a few of those in, it's quite effective. Get a little weigh scale and measure how well you're at, and measure actually how much you're getting down. Because remember, 1 milliliter or 1 kilogram of water weight equals 1,000 milliliters. So 1 gram equals 1 milliliter. You can actually say, oh, wow, I actually only took in 15 milliliters there, 1 gram of carb. I'm going to have to practice that a little bit more. So those are just some really practical advice on getting fueling in during a race.
No, thank you. I love that tip about pinching the cup. That's fantastic. I've observed Jan Frodeno, perhaps the greatest Ironman triathlete in history, famously walk the aid station, still running the 2:40 marathon off the bike. And, I remember in the 70.3 World Championships, he had Gomez on his hammer, and he still found time to walk in a half marathon off the bike. What would Jan be trying to achieve there, Trent, just to make sure that it gets in and he's getting on board? Or
he would just absolutely know that the last 10 to 20% of any prolonged endurance race over 2 hours or over 90 minutes can really go south if you don't fuel properly. And taking 30 seconds extra at an aid station could buy minutes, if not tens to 20 of minutes in the types of speeds and races he's doing. He's an 8-hour type guy. So that's what he's doing. He's just making sure. I don't know Yan. I don't work with Yan. Maybe he just finds that he's able to consume it in his GI tract and his belly feels better just by slowing it down a little bit. So
fantastic. And Trent, before we shift over to energy deficiency for athletes, that 4-hour marathoner, in terms of a gel, it's varied, but would they be looking at maybe 1 gel an hour as just a rough guideline?
Yeah, no, great question. I've had the honor of speaking at the New York City Marathon. Every marathon, every event has their big expos, and it's always the day before. So I always have this slide like, don't do everything I say tomorrow, because you got to practice it first. But if you don't have a plan, and you have zero fueling plan, you're probably not going to go too wrong with 1 gel an hour, which is about 25 grams of carbs per hour. And so, yeah, that's kind of the base level that a lot of 4-hour marathoners, 4 or 5 hour marathoners, can just start at. And ideally, they have some forethought in their 12, 16 week prep period. They have a few of those key marathon specific sessions where they have time to practice their fueling. Another thing for me, just as an aside, a little exercise physiology thing is, I really think there's diminishing term returns physically for running much more than about 3 hours. It just beats you up too much in your marathon prep. And we got to remember, like, these elite marathoners, they can knock out 42K and at altitude in 2.5 hours. And so they rarely run more than 2.5 hours. But for your 4-hour marathoner, for your 5-hour marathoner, I don't think they should be doing 4 and 5 hour runs. That's just insane to me. I do think psychologically they should go out for 4 or 5 hours. Like, perhaps they go out, they fuel, they walk an hour, they then do a 3-hour run, and then they walk another hour, and or they string it together. But they will then get to the start line feeling a lot less apprehension and saying, I can do this. Like, I've done a few 4 and 5 hour outings. Sure, I've only run 3 hours, but I can physically do this. And like, maybe a 3.5 hour run, if someone recovers well, is good. But much beyond that, you're the physio. It just beats the snot out of you. The injury risk goes way up, and I think you can offset that in different ways. So that's just another thought I have. And I don't coach recreational marathoners. I just an observation I've had over the years.
I think that's a brilliant tip, Trent. And it does speak to one of the things that, as a sports physio, we deal with ahead of any major marathon is, coaching or advising around training loads relative to what they're presenting with. So that's really practical. Thanks, Trent. Trent, two sort of topics that I have just found fascinating in my work and from the outside looking in, and I know you've got a lot to offer in these departments. One is this concept of relative energy deficiency in sport, and the other is body composition optimizing. We might start with the relative energy deficiency in sport. It's a more contemporaneous term that has been sort of around for a few years, probably better known in the world of sports medicine than the general public, I suspect, at this stage. Can you speak to, many people would resonate with the term female athlete triad, so can you just bring us in perspective of the evolution here from that terminology to the current term REDS?
Yeah, so it has been an evolution from female athlete triad to REDS, and the first consensus statement for REDS happened in Lausanne, Switzerland at the International Olympic Committee about 5 years ago, and was led by a physician named Margot Mountjoy, who is actually at the University of Guelph while I was there doing my PhD. So Margot and I go way, way back, and we still work together on a bunch of athletes and have penned various papers together. And she's a wonderful physician. And so basically what it was is there was an appreciation and emerging scientific evidence that REDS went much beyond female athletes and much more beyond a female athlete problem, in quotes. In other words, it's a lack of a menstrual cycle and low bone mineral density. And instead it was, well, wait a minute, we're seeing similar types of symptoms and outcomes in males. And we're seeing that it's not just bone mineral density, although that is one of the major findings so far. It's impacting on recovery profile. It's impacting on training adaptation. It potentially impacting on attention. It's impacting on mood and psychology and emotions. And so it's a much bigger spectrum. Now, the evidence across all those discipline areas is still emerging. The evidence and the strength of the evidence in males versus females looks different and is emerging. The clinical norm for testosterone in males is about 10 to 30. And so one of the indicators for REDS is if you're low in testosterone, but a male at 9 is still 9 times higher than your average female in testosterone. So it does seem like males suffer less from REDS than females, although I've certainly known a lot of males in REDS who just have had 5, 6, 7 career stress fractures. So it's still an emerging concept with a lot of people. I think in a lot of debriefs around injury, I think around biomechanical issues, it's the huge white elephant in the corner. I have some unbelievable friends who are insanely good biomechanists. But how many biomechanic running studies account and even normalize based on background BMD or REDS? I'm almost unaware of a single one. And so they have all these conclusions about, oh, well, the female athletes have these angles and this and that and the other thing. And I just look at it and I'm like, well, they have 6 times the stress fracture rates when they're in REDS. Is it biomechanics or is it bone mineral density issues? I just, there's some decent, the LEAF questionnaire, low energy availability female questionnaire. Like if you're doing a biomechanics female running study, like put that questionnaire in there, please. Just use it as a confounder, because when you work within your field and you have a depth of knowledge is great, but sometimes you got to pull back and look across your field as well. So, a little side rant there, but I think the incredible work on female athlete triad is absolutely included in the REDS literature. It's the area we know the most about in terms of energy cutoffs and sex hormone pulsatility and what some of the mechanisms are and how it affects bone and how it affects bone mineral density and bone turnover. But it is an area of research that is, I think, going to be really impactful and continue to be impactful in the next decades to come.
And Trent, this is an area that's sort of close to my heart personally, but also professionally. And, I spent from 11 years of age, better part of 2 decades or, more or less as endurance athlete, junior triathlon. And at 35 was diagnosed with osteoporosis in my spine and in my hips. And, it was quite a confronting finding for me, but that was off the back of a couple of femoral stress reactions. And there's not a week really in my work where I don't see a runner present with a bone stress injury of some kind. And my own journey's really had me sort of getting around this and just starting to reflect. And, I heard you share around, what role is the biomechanics of the runner playing versus these things that you just shared, Trent. And I'm sort of with you in the thinking that, they've always run that way. They haven't always had troubles necessarily. What is it about some of these other factors? And Trent, I heard you share prior that if you take an athlete and they're 300 to 400 calories down in a single day's intake, if you extrapolate that across 365 days, you're looking at a month of not basically eating, which no one in their right mind would do, but inadvertently, particularly endurance athletes, they may be making that mistake every single day.
Yeah. And that's the tricky bit with REDS is that it can be incredibly, well, first of all, it in many instances, it's non-purposeful. You're just unaware. Secondly, it can be just 300 or 400 calories. And on the individual level, the methodologies that we have for energy intake, I don't care who you are, it is really challenging to measure energy intake and energy expenditure to within 300 or 400 calories. The methods aren't there unless you're in a metabolic ward or you're using very expensive tracers. There's just too much noise to measure that. Yet that amount of calories multiplied by 365 is just over 100,000 calories or a month of eating. And so it's this thing that exists but is really hard to measure in terms of energy intake and energy expenditure. So a lot of the measurement tools now are going towards secondary indicators and more indicators of more prolonged energy deficits. So things like sex hormones. If you're a female and you're not on oral contraceptive and you don't have a menstrual cycle, and we measure your sex hormones and they're all flatlined, estrogen and progesterone, like those are really strong indicators you're in reds. On the male side, it's subclinical testosterone or lack of sex drive. That question right there is a quite powerful question, but it's sometimes a taboo question with virile male athletes. But it is, if you're uninterested in sex and you're 20 years old, that's probably a pretty big red flag for reds as well. Bone mineral density is obviously a very slow turning over tissue. Again, it can represent long-term issues with energy intake. History of other injuries, histories of illness. But part of the issue right now is there's still not a definitive REDS assessment tool. There's the REDS consensus statement. There's the female athlete triad consensus statement. There's tools in both of those consensus statements. But if you dig into the literature and you look for a validation study on either tool, it's not yet there. And so, yeah, there's a lot of work to be done. All of us that work in sport and experience sport and are aware of endocrine outcomes of energy know that the issue is there, but it's, again, this very complex soliloquy of different mechanisms and different presentations. It's kind of like overtraining. It's a really there's not a definitive diagnosis for it. I do think we can get there. I'm continuing. Lots of other people are continuing to do energy availability research, and the explosion in this field is incredible. The last few years as well, and for any listeners that are interested, I'm an associate editor on the International Journal of Sports Nutrition, Exercise Metabolism, IJSNEM, and there's a free open access journal on REDS from last year that has about 15 articles in there. That's well worth looking at.
We'll link that up in the show notes, Trent. And I think the takeaway I've written down there, Trent, is that there's no definitive diagnosis. It's not so evident. It's hard to track energy intake and energy expenditure to within the calories that may matter, but there are those secondary indicators as you outlined. Yeah. So if you're a male athlete and you're getting your bloods and you're low in testosterone, you're not interested in your sex, or your sex drives less. If you're a female, missing periods or menstruation cycles, speak to a health professional.
Yeah, no, that's well put. And even to this day, I'll have a female come to me and, I haven't had a menstrual cycle in a year, but my doctor says it's not a big problem. He's put me on birth control as a compensatory mechanism to protect the bones. And the newest data shows that that's not the case either. There's an underlying energy issue. Just forcing in exogenous testosterone, progesterone and estrogen in an oral contraceptive is not the long-term solution. And so, it's a complex area. It's an exciting area. It also impacts on body composition. Very quickly the human body can adapt to lack of calories by lowering metabolic rate, literally within 5 to 7 days. And so we've evolved as humans to be highly protective of energy because there was a lot of famines until recently. And we protect energy really, really well, and we store energy as body fat really, really well. And so a drop in basal metabolic rate is another indirect indicator of REDS. Like if if your measured resting metabolic rate or RMR drops way off, and you have these other indicators, again, that strengthens the RED's diagnosis.
And I've heard you cite, Trent, that appearances can be deceptive. I mean, the endurance world, for example, leaner, lighter is sort of the target. There's no athlete that wants to carry that extra frame weight around come race day. Yet there was a paper that I heard you cite, or a publication around gymnasts and runners, and the findings of that were I found, I believe, quite interesting. Can you share a little bit about that paper and the findings, which are almost counterintuitive to what you might expect?
The first author in that paper is Deutz, Deutz. And Dan Bernadotte, a longtime nutrition expert out of University of Georgia, is a senior author on that paper. And I believe it's from MSSE, MedSci Sports Exercise, and it's probably the 96 or 98, somewhere around there. And what they did is they looked at about 60 elite female athletes in 4 groups. There was rhythmic gymnasts, typical Olympic gymnasts, long distance and middle distance, and they measured energy intake and expenditure in as best as they could with the best methods possible. And long story short is the rhythmic gymnasts were by far at about 500 to 600 caloric deficit. And the other group that was in best caloric balance were the middle distance athletes. And across those groups, the rhythmic gymnasts, despite them being in a 500 to 600 calorie deficit, actually had the highest percent body fat. And the leanest group was a group right around energy balance, which was the middle distance athletes. And it's very counterintuitive, and I've seen it in our long-term historical database or body comp databases that we have with all of our elite athletes. But by far the leanest athletes are the athletes that are in energy balance for the majority, if not their entire careers. And they have regular menstrual cycles. They have high testosterone. I mean, testosterone leans you out. When you are, the harder you try to lose weight and the less caloric or the more negative caloric balance that you're in, the association tends to be higher percent body fat. Yes, body weight might go down, but so does muscle mass. And so it's this catch-22. And I think being as many weeks and months of the year in great energy availability to help drive training is the best thing for long-term, not only long-term training adaptation, but also long-term body composition. And in many of those instances, there's then required no need for body comp periodization. They're super lean. They come into racing, and it's absolutely no problem. And I've had instances with males who have tons of red indicators where I'm like, okay, just go on a journey with me for 3 months. Let's just take in 300 calories more a day. It's the fall. You got lots of time before race season. And in many of those instances, they eat more and become leaner. Well, how does that work? Well, actually, they have clinically low testosterone. By eating more, they now raise their testosterone. And if you look at an outcome of testosterone, it's highly correlated to increases in lean muscle mass. They restore testosterone values, and they actually get leaner over time despite eating more. And they might gain weight, but it's power to weight ratio weight in the right way. They're more powerful, they're recovering better, they're leaner, and maybe they go up a kilo or two. And to me, that's no big deal. They'll probably perform better and faster.
Yeah, it's that lean muscle mass. That's outstanding insight, Trent. And I guess if you're looking at an athlete, and we can be pretty quick to judge based on appearances, things may not be as they seem. Like you may have an endurance athlete who seems like, maybe you're overeating because you don't seem to be leaning up, but the reality is underpinning that lack of seeming leanness may be an energy deficiency, the exact opposite.
You nailed it. And so it's really important not to judge a book by its cover. It's important to do, as a clinician or a practitioner, a great intake. That includes body composition, sex hormones. It includes RED's indicators, injury history. So you get a full picture, and you really know where on the spectrum this athlete's lying, because I've made mistakes way early in my career too of making an assumption based on a visual that was incorrect.
You're listening to Trent Stellingwerff, PhD, on all things fueling for the endurance athlete and energy availability on this an expert edition of the Physical Performance Show. Support for today's show comes from PhysioCrem. PhysioCrem is a topical massage cream containing natural plant-based ingredients, ideal for the temporary relief of muscular aches and pains. If you're conscious of what you put on your body, you'll be happy to know that PhysioCrem does not contain parabens or hydroxybenzoates, and its non-greasy formula doesn't leave any sticky residue behind. PhysioCrem can be found Australia-wide at your local Coles, chemist or health store, as well as via their online shop. PhysioCrem have generously offered listeners of the show 20% off all products available online. Simply jump over to PhysioCrem, FISIOCREM.com.au to redeem this offer, and remember, hurting sucks and PhysioCrem have got your back. Support for today's show also comes from Pogo Physio. We exist to help you get back to your physical best following injury. We want everyone who walks through the doors of Pogo Physio to complete their rehabilitation, get back to their physical best, and in doing so, cross their physio finish line. To find out more about Pogo Physio's award-winning services, including our very popular telehealth services, which allow for physiotherapy services to be dispensed or provided worldwide via technology, jump over to pogophysio.com.au. For now, let's jump back on this an expert edition with Dr. Trent Stellingwerff. People may hear this talk about energy availability, the importance of having it there, because if it's not there, then the body's not going to prioritise bone health, it's not going to prioritise recovery, psychological well-being potentially. So there's real health concerns if that energy availability isn't there. And you mentioned that it's hard to exactly measure intake and expenditure. You mentioned measuring resting metabolic rate. But how's the recreational athlete best to guide themselves if body weight isn't a good guide, because you may be gaining lean muscle mass and putting on weight? So excuse the potentially frustrating question, but can you just boil it down to some practical takeaways for us?
Yeah, body weight is not a good guide. So I would say everyone can get a sense of stress fracture history, tendon injury history, massive changes in body weight or body composition recently. If you're a female, menstrual cycle status, although that can be clouded with oral contraceptive use. If you're a male, changes in sex drive. And so you can use those types of indicators coupled with any major dietary shifts or changes that you've made, or any major training shifts. If all of a sudden, the most reds I see tend to be in our youth and junior developing athletes. And a lot of it is inadvertent because they've doubled or tripled their training load in a week and not realized, I need more food on my plate. And so any large changes to training or, some kind of diet that you've just went on, those are all things every single listener can have an opinion on or an insight on that can probably give a pretty good indicator of whether or not they need to seek maybe some more medical consult.
Yeah, okay. So it comes back to those secondary indicators again.
Yes.
And it's not. Is it important to get an idea of your intake, trying to keep track of your calories, or it's really irrelevant if those things aren't present?
It's almost irrelevant if those things are present. And I've gone away in my practice quite a bit of having athletes track that. The only time we will do it tends to be more from a temporal effect in terms of just phasing nutrition throughout the day and the timing of nutrition around when their training is. So that can be effective when you're doing some of the tracking stuff. But I also look at, whatever software I'm using. Like the app MyFitnessPal is probably one of the better ones out there for nutritional tracking, but you still need to take it with a grain of salt in that it might be 10 to 15% over or under reported. So just be aware of that when you're looking at the information.
And I have to reflect on my own clinical practice as a physiotherapist working with a lot of endurance athletes, and I almost feel like advising them if they're presenting with a bone stress injury, Trent, to look, if you're not sure, just maybe eat a bit more than what you think you need. That's a very stripped down recommendation. But I guess that leads into this idea of getting ready for an event and, being conscious of your time, Trent. Just sort of briefly speak into the role of periodizing body composition for elite athletes, but then where it may or may not fit in for the recreational athlete.
In one of the papers or reviews, we've articulated a really nice definition. I can't remember what we wrote, but it's something along the lines of, the purposeful manipulation of nutrition and training loads to manipulate body composition so that you reach a desired optimal body comp at target races. And it's, give or take the definition, something like that. And a huge part of it is that just like the athlete only physically in training peaks once or twice a year, I think they should also only think about peaking their body composition once or twice a year. So many folks think they need to be, lean, mean, laser thin, laser light year round as they're training. And in fact, I've seen incredible, not only from a health perspective, but just training gains by carrying a bit more weight. Work equals force. There's physics involved with work and carrying a bit more mass, as force is mass times acceleration. And so, you can train your heart and your lungs and your muscles to carry a bit more weight 8, 9, 10 months a year. And then there may be a phase where you become a bit more strict around your eating. You practice a little bit of portion control, where you then lean out and try to hit absolutely peak condition at your target championship. And I will say, however, there's a lot of athletes, and especially male athletes, that don't even need to worry about this. Their sex hormones, their testosterones are great. They're pretty lean. They're in their early 20s. If they eat well and they fuel well, they're going to show up lean and mean on the Olympic final and be absolutely fine. With all of this, it takes measurement. There's context to it. There's risk and reward to it. These are all elements that you need to balance. You need to understand where the athlete is. Is the athlete mature? Do they even have the nutrition skills to execute the interventions? Do they have sound personal body composition awareness? Are they giving indicators that they might have disordered eating or eating disorders? Anytime you have an emphasis around anything on diet, you need to be aware of those types of outcomes as well. This is an elite athlete concept. It's not something I would put on junior athletes. It's not something I would put on developing athletes. It's athletes that have mastered the nuances of nutrition. They're intermediate to advanced in nutrition skills. They're training at full training loads. A lot of the other big rocks are all there, and this is another aspect to performance that they can try to eke out and tweak out. A key element of that 9-year body comp case study is that it was a 9-year process. Every single year we learned and adapted. We figured out how far we could push things or not push things. We were conservative early and then got a little more aggressive later as we gained information and gained data. And so there's a career element to this, that it's not just, next year we'll figure this out and then we'll move on to the next thing. So those are all contextual factors, again, that need to be considered when thinking about body composition. For the vast majority of just recreational athletes, if they're able to get more sleep, perhaps lay off the booze a bit more. I was having a glass of wine here as it's 7:45, folks. I had one glass of wine. Lay off the booze, train a bit more. You know what? Eat pragmatically and the body composition, they're probably going to lose a bunch of kilos and go faster anyways, and they don't need to be super extreme with a lot of this stuff, right? So again, this is more of an elite of the elite athlete concept.
It makes sense at just a common sense level in my mind. So Trent, that sounds like really good practical advice. Just, you did mention disordered eating, indicators of disordered eating. Is there anything for people to self-reflect on, or for coaches, health professionals to be aware of there? Are you looking at the obvious things, or what are some indicators?
Yeah, so some of the indicators can be a very excessive change in body weight or body composition, like happening over a month or two. With that, it's sometimes tricky for people that see the athlete every single day. And so it's good to have other coaches or other people to help guide you on that. And it's like, we just visited my parents. So our 5-year-old, we don't see him growing. But my parents, who haven't seen him in 4 months, is like, oh, man, Teo shot way up. And so sometimes in your own backyard with the athletes that you're coaching or working with, because you see them every single day, the large change in body composition isn't as large as you realize. So, having confidence to say, hey, so-and-so has really lost a lot of weight. What's going on there? Over obsession with clean eating is a really big red flag. Really extreme, weird diets like, fruit only or cucumbers only or lettuce only. Other indicators or confounders can be A-type personalities, so control freaks, your straight A students, high achievers, sports that involve success with power to weight ratios or have much higher levels of eating disorders. There's higher levels of eating disorders in females than males, and there's higher levels and rates of eating disorders in aesthetic sports, diving and synchronized swimming and things such as that. So those are all be indicators to just be aware of, and I think every coach should be aware of that. And if they have an athlete that shows extreme changes in dietary behavior and a brand new diet, it's worth a conversation to just unpack that a little bit more. And if you're getting your spidey senses tingling, then it might be worth trying to set that athlete up with some more professional insights.
You're listening to Dr. Trent Stellingwerff on this, an expert edition around all things fueling for the endurance athlete and energy availability. If you missed last week's episode featuring UK-based sports podiatrist Ian Griffiths on all things foot orthoses, facts and fallacies, here's a little snippet of the expert edition that you missed.
Regardless of someone being really, regardless of whatever sport they're doing, whatever injury they bring to the table, almost 100% of the time, gentlemen will show me their work brogues and say, oh, look, this is where my shoes wear out. What does this mean? In the vast majority of people, it's the posterior lateral heel counter. The majority of the wear in that part of a shoe when you're walking doesn't occur during stance phase. It actually occurs as you gently scuff the ground when the leg's in swing phase, and then at your first point of contact when you heel strike when you're walking, because that's usually in a slightly inverted position because of step width and tibial architecture.
To learn and enjoy from the full episode, jump over to iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, or wherever it is that you enjoy your podcast from. And whilst there, feel free to peruse the archives of the show, including expert editions, interest editions, coaches' corners, and featured performers. For now, let's jump back with this week's expert edition featuring Dr. Trent Stellingwerff on all things fueling for the endurance athlete. Trent, you've been very generous with your time. Finally, every guest of the show issues listeners with two things. One's a physical challenge for the week, and then the most frustrating question for a guest is one piece of advice. If you could only issue one thing that would help a listener of the show perform at their best, Trent, what would that be?
Yeah, I thought a little bit about these. And so, for a lot of us as professionals with families and work and partners, life really is 24/7, 365 pursuit. And one thing I have been much more cognizant about in the last 5 years is that part of that 365 is personal care. Take the time to program in personal physical activity, personal adequate sleep, and personal time for reflection. I really do believe that no one is too busy to not include those things into their days and into their weeks. I say this as if I asked you 10 years ago on August the 9th in Australia what you did, you don't remember. Everything that comes at us right now seems really important, but in 10 years from now, most of it is noise. And if you don't take care of yourself, then in 20 years from now, I won't be able to go mountain biking with my kids. That's the way I look at it. So in my schedule at most lunch breaks, it says run. And sometimes my schedule is jammed up and people are like, oh, I can't get into your schedule. I'm like, yep, you can come for a run with me and we can chat on the run. So,
that's brilliant. So practical and, but powerful, the perspective. Trent, that's great. And physical challenge, what's the physical challenge? To go with Trent Stellingwerff on a lunchtime run?
I thought about this as well, and I'm going to change it and say I've had a physical challenge, not of the week, but every year. And about 4 or 5 years ago, I realized that since I've been 33 years old, I've been able to muster a 10-kilometer race in my age. So every year I get a year older, and I got an extra minute to play with. So I was able to do this all the way from 33 years old until last year. And last year I actually had a pretty significant back injury where I was laid up for 6 months. So I missed the 42. I'm back on track for sure. I think I can go sub 43 this year. I still have a bunch of months to play with. But I like those types of yearly lines in the sands rather than one-off daily or weekly challenges, because it's something I need to commit to for the year. It's not like 100 squats or just blow it out one time. It's something, if I'm going to run a 43-minute 10K at age 43, that with my work schedule and 2 kids under 5, that's a year-long commitment. It's not over the top for me. It's 3 to 5 runs a week and just a few workouts here and there, and I can get it done. So find something in your life that you can have a checkpoint each year that just keeps you on track.
Trent, that's wonderful. Thank you. And Trent, to follow you, find out more about your work, where's the best place to follow along?
Yeah, I do Twitter. I'm pretty active there. A lot of scientists are. And folks, there's this wonderful website called PubMed.com where when you see crazy stuff on the internet, you can go to PubMed and search our scientific articles to find out the truth. So you can stick my name in PubMed and see what work I've done there too.
That's brilliant. And there's a lot of work you've done there, Trent. I mean, to date, how many published papers?
It's right around 100. Yeah. It's wonderful collaborations, wonderful students. Other than 1 or 2 papers, every single one features other co-authors that are amazing, and so. And a lot of them have been through Australia. I've had a wonderful long-term relationship with Louise Burke and John Hawley, and doing a lot of papers with them. We co-share grad students, and so I have a lot of close connections in Australia.
Trent Stellingwerff, thank you for your time and all the best for the 10K challenge, age challenge, we'll call it, for 2019 and beyond.
Thanks, mate. You can join me next year.
It sounds good. I'll work towards it. Thanks, Trent.
All right, thanks, Brad.
So there you have it, another expert edition of the Physical Performance Show. And I know and I trust that you enjoyed Trent Stellingwerff's share-ins today. If you did, please feel free to reach out and let Trent know. You'll find Trent over on Twitter at @Stellingwerff, STELLINGWERFF. Or simply jump over to Pogo Physio to the show notes and we will have all of Trent's handles there. But please let Trent know what it was that you enjoyed or learnt from Trent's share-ins today. Now, this is such an important topic. If you know someone in your world that would benefit or needs to hear this information, please reach out and share it with them. The concept of relative energy deficiency in sports really is something that every endurance athlete, I believe, needs to be aware of. And as you heard from Trent today, the consequences can be considerable if an energy availability deficit does exist for the endurance athlete. A big thanks to those who have been leaving ratings and reviews over on iTunes. Aside from being a whole lot of fun to read and also serving as encouragement for myself and the team, they really do help the show grow. Big thanks this week to Cal McAuliffe. Cal rated the show 5 stars and commented, "Great work. This podcast gives the public so many different avenues to information to help us improve at our given sport or just grow our knowledge base in different areas. As a runner, this show has helped me in lots of areas. Very professional podcast. Nice work." Cal, thank you for taking the time to leave that rating and review. If you are enjoying the show, then please also, if you're yet to do so, hit subscribe. That really is the rocket fuel that helps the show gain more reach. A massive thanks, as always, to the good folk who make this show possible week in, week out. Daryl Misson, our audio engineer, Susan Wilkin, all things show administration, Matthew Walding, all things show graphic design, and Oliver Crossley assisting behind the scenes. Massive thanks again to today's show sponsor, Physiocrem. Your support really does make this show possible. Don't forget to jump over to physiocrem.com.au and there you can redeem 20% off any of the products available online. Physiocrem is the cream of choice at Pogo Physio, and it is a product that you want in your medicine cabinet. Now, coming up next week on the Physica Performance Show, we continue the Expert Edition series. Next week, I'll bring you a conversation that I recently had with Claire Moynihan, PhD, on all things considerations for the female athlete. Now, this is a show not to be missed, not just for the female athletes, but also the males. There's key takeaways in here for athletes, coaches, and health professionals alike. Here's a little snippet of my conversation with Claire Moynihan.
Yeah, so disordered eating specifically refers to an individual who perhaps controls their diet a little more than is required, and by that I mean the caloric intake as well as what types of food they allow themselves to have or not have. An individual that becomes obsessive about food, that restricts food groups, and that has perhaps a fear of consuming too many calories. So while we once thought, as you said, disordered eating was part of the female athlete triad, it certainly doesn't have to be.
So be sure to be tuning in next week to learn more around considerations for the female athlete. Until then, keep pursuing your physical best performance. I'm Brad Beer, and this has been the Physica Performance Show.